Looking at the camera.
Yes, you are.
Okay. I just can't see my. Oh, there I am. Hi. Okay. No. Oh well, it just needs to mute. I think we need to have it on so we can see it on the. Okay, it's live on the YouTube. Awesome. And can the YouTube see the folks who are on Zoom? We want them to see the delegate too, not just the room. That'll work. You can close the chat. Whoa. I like. Okay. And now, and they can see both of us. Perfect. Okay. All right. We're getting started. Yes. Why don't we sit? We can sit up here and just chat. I'm not going to use the podium. Um, and we can get started on in our 1F for our session here this morning. Awesome. Okay. And we have to use the mic so everyone can hear us. So we'll just pass it back and forth. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. All right. I know it's a small group here, but I'm going to need a little bit more energy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Awesome. That's the kind of energy we need to bring to this session today. I'm excited to be with you. My name is Rebecca Rear. I'm the Director of Climate Policy and Justice at the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. And many moons ago was Dr. Wilson's graduate student. So I'm a graduate here at the University of Maryland School of Public Health. So background in public health. Excited to be here at the 9th symposium. And thank you all for joining us for this session, legislative efforts to advance environmental justice in Maryland. And we're joined today in person by Senator Arthur Ellis, and we are joined virtually by Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo. So thank you so much both for joining us. And we're really going to get into some of the history of efforts to address environmental justice in Maryland through legislative efforts. And we're going to hear from each of our representatives about efforts that they've led to advance cumulative impacts and environmental justice issues in Maryland. But as by way of introduction, I actually just wanted to ask you both to say hello to everyone. Hi, everyone joining virtually as well. So thank you for being here in the room and virtually. But I wanted to ask you, uh, introduce yourselves to our audience and what first made you run for office. So just by way of introduction.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hello, everyone. I'm Arthur Ellis. I serve in the Senate of Maryland. This is my 5th year, second term. So I ran and won re-election last year. And so I served for 4 years, my first 4 years in Annapolis. I was on the Education, Health, Environmental Affairs Committee. So did a lot of environmental affairs issue. This year I was transferred this session to the Finance Committee. Less environmental issues that we deal directly with, but I've put in quite a few legislation, quite a few of them passed. Some are being implemented without being actual passed, and to really take care of some of the environmental issues, justice issues that we have throughout Maryland. So the question is why I ran for office. So many things weren't being addressed. So many things weren't being done with my former senator from Charles County. We have the worst commute in the nation. Charles County, 77% of our constituents who works go to work in DC North every day. And we have the worst commute in the nation. And you hear people use worst, good, best, but this is not my words alone analysis. Bloomberg and the state highway administration did studies and compared nationwide with travel time. And our constituents have the worst commute in the nation. So no one was doing anything about it. So fast forward, my 5th year in office, I put a bill in, my very first bill to have light rail taking our commuters from Charles County through southern Prince George's County into Washington, D.C. And it passed. And this year we have several $100 million in the state budget to do called NEPA, National Environmental Planning Act, to engineering work, environmental work, to actually go to construction. So tremendous progress, support from the environmental community, and just that was my major reason for running. And you can say, well, you fulfilled your major uh, purpose. You can move on. Now I have to make sure that choo-choo train keeps on running. So thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you. And Delegate Friedrich Hidalgo.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for having us. This is always an important issue to talk about and is becoming much more evident how important it is. We can talk about that a little bit. As far as this is my 10th, going into my 11th year in the General Assembly. I served on the Environment and Transportation Committee, where I did a lot of work on environment for the last 9 years. And then recently I went over to Economic Matters, where we deal with a lot of the climate change issues when it comes less environment and more climate change. So think like utilities and electricity generation, business, solar, wind, that kind of thing. So why I ran, I guess about 13 years ago, I found myself coming to Annapolis to testify on bills that were being proposed that I didn't think were very great bills or good ideas. And while doing that, I just learned a little bit more about how the place ran, and kind of pulled the curtain back a little bit, so to speak. And then ran in 2010 and lost, and then got appointed in 2013, then ran in 14 and 18 and 22, and that's where I find myself. I love what I do. It's the best job that I've ever had. Yep, that's where I am.
That's great. And I before I ask each of you a specific question about how you've led on environmental justice, legislatively, I also am curious, when did you first encounter an environmental justice issue as an elected official? So what was the first EJ issue you remember sort of being presented with or noticing once you were in office?
Okay, yeah. Excellent question. So my main commercial area in Charles County is a Waldorf community, which is our main business area. And I was so disgusted, even before I ran. I mean, the highway was taking care of all. The grass was really high on the highways and the median, we have a wide median. The trash was accumulating. And I'm like, this is wrong. You know, the state owns the highway, and the state is responsible for cleaning up the highways. Like, I own my home, I'm responsible for cleaning up my yard and my home, right? And so the state was negligent. And Waldorf is a majority black, a lot of Hispanic have moved in, and a smaller number of Asian Americans. And it's being ignored. And I go to majority white areas, the grass is cut, the trash is picked up. I'm like, this is wrong. This is really wrong. So I told the state highway, uh, my first meeting will be with you guys when I become senator. This is when I was running. And it will be about you picking up the trash and then cut the grass in that order. And I kept my promise. My first official meeting when I became a senator was with State Highway, the engineers, and you will. And they did. And so it's beautiful now. The grass is cut. You see this time of year the crepe myrtles are blossoming. It's amazing, you know. We look like we're a majority white area. But, you know, we knew that I knew they could do it. And we got that. I got that done the very first year in office, first month. I said, "Oh, really? You can do this?" So my focus went statewide on the Washington D.C. metro area, Baltimore areas. The roads were trash, you know, and so I put legislation in continually over 2 years to require State Highway to pick up the trash across Maryland and to cut the grass. And they're like, "Well, we don't have the people to do it. Well, hire contractors." You know, we have the money in Maryland. We boast that Maryland have the highest income in the nation. We collect a lot of taxes. Well, why are some of our major roadways trashy and grass? So, we battled them and they resisted under the Hogan administration. Fast forward this year, Governor Moore was sworn in. We had that conversation, and State Highway sent me an email saying that we are launching Operation Clean Sweep to clean up the DMV and the Baltimore suburbs. They picked up over 300 tons of trash. Okay. And they measured and they sent me the email, let me know how many tons of trash they picked up. And they are continually maintaining that. So if you drive through the Washington suburbs now, if you drive through Baltimore, you'll see the grass is cut. I came up on 95 from the Wilson Bridge this morning up to College Park, and there were people up there picking up trash because you don't let it build up, you keep picking it up. And you also cut the grass. And you do that drive, you'll see the difference as we speak. So I'm very happy that we pushed that, and that was one of the number one things. That's a low hanging fruit, right? And so that fruit is picked, and I'm so happy. And we had University of Maryland faculty, Dr. Roberts from the university, come and testify about the impact of trash being on our roadways, the impact of grass being tall, uncut, rodents, health, and not just physical health, but mental health, how we feel about ourselves and our community. And this was a governmental responsibility to do that. And they were not doing it. Disgusting. I grew up, I was a janitor in high school, so I know how to get my hands dirty, proudly clean up office buildings. So I know that when we put an effort in to clean up things, it can be done. And so I'm happy to say that mission has been accomplished, and we have to maintain and continue the process of making sure that every citizen in Maryland feel good about their community. When they drive down the street, when they walk down the street, the grass is cut, the trash is picked up. Environmental justice, and I have more bills that we will talk about. I won't continue, but that's one non-legislative action that was important to us in Maryland, which I can honestly say mission accomplished.
You don't often get to say mission accomplished, so that's congratulations on that. And I think one thing I just wanted to lift up, because I do work for the League of Conservation Voters, is that election clearly the outcomes of elections matter, and that can make a difference. So just a friendly reminder to vote and bring your friends to the polls. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Delegate Fraser Hidalgo. And the question: when did you first encounter an environmental justice issue as an elected official?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say I'm not sure the very first time I did. I will tell you the first time that I think that I really dug in on the issue and did a lot of research, and that is when I started working on the fracking ban back in like 2014, 2015, started learning more and more about it. Then I took a trip up to Pennsylvania and learned about what they were doing as far as, horizontal hydraulic fracturing in Pennsylvania. And I learned a lot driving down mountain roads, talking to people in the communities. And that started to open my eyes, and I started doing more and more and more research. And what we ended up doing is I put in a bill to create a moratorium so that we would not frack in Maryland for a couple of years while we researched it more, which we did. And then I did a lot more research and took our entire committee, Environment and Transportation Committee with the chair. We went out to Western Maryland, to Garrett County, and talked to some of the folks out there that were going to be affected both by fracking and those that would theoretically economically benefit from fracking. So we had a big town hall, and we had, I don't know, over 100 people there. And some of them were, we want fracking because we want the money, and the others were, we don't want fracking because it's bad for the environment. And while we were out there, I organized this tour of where a lot of fracking would be. And we had a bus, and we had all of the members of ENT that could make it come. And we went on the bus, and we were going up and down some very narrow country mountain roads. So they were very narrow, and off to one side is just a big ravine and a creek in the bottom. And that creek leads to a river, and the river leads to more waterways, leads to drinking water, leads to all kinds of things. And I remember specifically going up some of these mountains, and on the right, you would look down at this ravine, and you'd go, man, if one of these trucks like went down this ravine, this would be an environmental like nightmare with all that fracking fluid or equipment that would get stuck down there or spill there. And then on the left, I remember seeing homes, some of them right on the road, older homes sometimes. Some of those homes were impoverished homes. And I remember seeing like kids out there. And then the research that I had done was that each one of these wells could be anywhere from 400 to about 550 truck trips. That meant that little country mountain road was going to have 400 or 500 diesel trucks coming up and down that road to dig or to run in a well. And then I thought, my God, so not only do we have to deal with any kind of well-related issues and water when it comes to drinking water and aquifers being contaminated, not only do we have to deal with the methane that comes out and the addition to greenhouse gas emissions just from leakage. Not only do we have to worry about the transporting of the methane and the gas and the burning of the gas, all of those environmental issues. But on top of all of those, we have to worry about these little mountain roads with some very impoverished, very poor communities, in many cases, very poor communities, having 400 or 500 trucks spewing diesel fumes and all kinds of carcinogens in their front lawns and invariably into their homes. And and the kids that live there and the adults that live there inhaling all of that. And that doesn't even take into consideration if one of these trucks runs off the road on one of these mountain passes into a ravine and does a lot more damage. And I just thought about all those kids. Again, a lot of them were going to be economically disadvantaged. They were going to be put in a position where they were going to inhale and ingest a lot of pollution. And so that was probably, Rebecca, my big first piece where I was like, oh my God, what are we doing? That's it. Then the next year we passed the bill and we banned fracking. So that was a win.
If I recall, public health was a big part of that argument, and that helped people who didn't necessarily identify as environmentalists, let's say, but started to see the impact, the health impact. When I distinctly remember a mom coming to testify and saying, I moved to Western Maryland because it was quiet and peaceful and the air quality was better than where we were living. And my kid was having seizures. So we moved out here to actually help. He has chemical sensitivity. And he's had less of an issue since we've moved out here. And since they've started bringing this equipment here, it started back up again. And so,
yeah, absolutely. And Rebecca, you and I worked on a lot of that together, and that was a really big piece for me. That was an eye-opening epiphany for me, is the absolute direct connection between public health and climate change and the environment. But public health goes hand in hand, and I have been fighting ever since that time to try to link, and I'll talk more about some of my bills, but to try to link those two, because most people I don't think most people realize that increased levels of asthma, increased levels of potential learning disabilities, all of that stuff is directly linked to climate change.
And how many folks listening, how many folks in the room have understand that link? Like, so you can give a personal story, you can talk about, and have you told that story to your elected officials? Yes. Yeah. No. So just, something to think about. If we're hearing directly from folks that it's important to make that connection, and you have the stories that help make that connection, help us by making your voice heard in this conversation. And so that's what, part of this session is hearing hearing from our elected officials who are making a difference in the halls of Annapolis. And from my perspective, part of this is about you and making sure and understanding your role in the process as well. And that you can be an expert and come testify, and you're also an expert in your own life. And that bringing that experience to the legislative arena, particularly when it comes to making the connection between climate change and our health and the true difference that environmental justice and cumulative impact legislation can make, those are the critical areas where your voice can make a difference. And that story I told, that was 8 years ago, and I remember it because it's visceral. And hearing about the mental health, hearing that, yeah, I am discouraged every day when I walk out of my house because all I see is trash. When you can say, I feel great because my neighborhood is lined with trees and the air is better and I don't have to hear the noise from the cars. And so like telling that story makes a huge difference. So we are going to hear now directly about legislation you're working on. So what have you been excited about in the past, and sort of what do you, I think we're already looking towards that 2024 session. How many of you all are Marylanders? When is our legislative session? Starting in January. Excellent. Ends in April. We know. So you'd be surprised how many times I go to a room and nobody knows, because every state legislature is a little bit different. And so being involved in your state, knowing when your state session starts and ends and who your elected officials are is really important. So excellent. If I had a gold star, I would give it to you right now. But yes, it's gearing up in January. So what are you looking forward to? What do you got planned for environmental justice legislation this coming session?
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you, Rebecca. So you mentioned, in tying into your question, trees in neighborhoods. So the big climate legislation we've worked on over the last few years in Annapolis, part of that was planting a few million more trees in Maryland. And we talked about like Western Maryland, a lot of trees, Southern Maryland, a lot of trees. You go into a lot of the urban areas, Baltimore, and even urban area in Waldorf, don't have that many trees. So I put an amendment on a huge bill to require that a large amount of those trees are planted in urban areas. And so that's happening now. It's funded, and it's important to have trees in our neighborhoods, because tree-lined neighborhoods decrease our summer temperature in the neighborhood. Trees, grown trees with leaves on it. And there is a disparity in between, say, a tree-lined neighborhood and a neighborhood with absolutely no trees. And I've heard upwards of 10 degrees in the summer months. So it's very significant. And we're talking about climate change with the temperature going higher and higher. We can affect that on a local level by having trees in our neighborhoods. So I'm really happy about that. And so many of my legislative initiatives has been implemented legislatively. Um, we have talked about the trees. Also, I think a couple years ago, put in a bill for environmental justice scorecard, which passed. My version of the bill didn't pass because of petty political grievances, but the House version passed. So a little lesson about um, legislation. So you have two bodies. You don't need legislation to pass from the Senate and the House, each version. As long as one version pass, you're good to go, right? And so I'm just happy. I'm not there to really take credit for everything. I mean, I need credit for something, right? But the key is to get the mission accomplished. I'm a retired military officer, and I've we're taught, and I'm a 83 grad from University of Maryland, went through ROTC right here. And so really excellent program for 4 years. Taught about mission. What is the mission? And the key is to have the mission accomplished. And so we're having a lot of missions accomplished in Maryland General Assembly with our environmental bills. During the George Floyd uproar, George from Minnesota was murdered by a police officer, and that caused us to focus on a lot of police reform issues. but I worked with my colleagues in the Senate to form a Senate President's Committee on Equity and Inclusion. So we expanded that not just to police reform, but environmental justice issues and others issues. But we spent a lot of time reviving the Maryland Commission on Environmental Justice. It was just sitting there. And they're required by law to give a report to General Assembly every year. And they've been around, I think, probably 15 years. And the reports came down to something like this. Oh, we met and we had coffee and we talked about some requests for assistance from all the power plants in Brandywine, but that's not our jurisdiction. Meeting adjourned. That was the report. Like this, so we reformed that agency. And so through the Senate President's Work Group on Equity and Inclusion, we require a equity score on a lot of legislation to not just introduce new bills, but bills that's going through the General Assembly. We give a score on those bills to say how does it impact when it comes to equity. And so we have that mechanism in place to make sure, because so many of our bills, they impact our citizens, right? Direct impact. And so we need to operate from a new lens. We've done in Annapolis fiscal, each bill we score it, how much will it cost? If we can do that, we can also look at the impact on every segment of our communities. And so that is something that I will continue to look at to make sure that bills, not just like ones that come through my committee, finance, but from every committee, is basically looking at equity. And this past session, I think put in quite a few amendments on bills that on the Senate floor, which came from other committees having to do with equity, and successfully done that. Folks were like, oh my goodness, how do you put so many amendments on bills on the Senate floor? It's really hard to do. But, you know, we have directive from on high, the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, to make sure all these bills have an equity lens on it, all this legislation. And so when you speak to your legislators, remind them of that opportunity that they have to every bill that they vote on. We have to vote on every bill that passes Annapolis. When I say we as a senator, I'm expected to vote on every bill. I can't take a pass. Oh, I don't like that issue, let me run from it. No, I have to make a decision. And so your representatives have to make a decision on all those bills that pass through. So when you speak to your representatives, just don't ask them about what they are doing, what bills they're introducing, but let them know what are you doing from an equity lens on all those bills that goes through your committee and whether the House of Delegates or in the Senate of Maryland, and they have an impact to make sure it is equitable.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's so important because you mentioned the fiscal note. Every fiscal note is it's a direct cost to the state. Okay, if we implement this program, we have to hire 2 new people for the Department of the Environment, so it will cost this much. The fiscal note doesn't say, but by implementing this program, it will then save residents X number of dollars from asthma hospitalizations, or it will save direct costs in transportation because we're bringing a resource closer to people. And that's what the equity note starts to get at, is looking at the full equation. And that's really, public health is about that full equation, not just, yes, the state will hire people to do this and it will cost money, or you'll start a new program and that needs enforcement, so you have to hire an enforcement officer. Yes, so that's the hard cost to the state. But the other side of that equation is often more in savings. And so it's not quite apples to apples, right? It's direct cost versus cost savings to residents. But it's so important that we start to have that conversation about the full equation. And something like the EJ, the screening permitting, including an EJ score on the permit, is also getting at that issue as well, by saying every permit applicant for certain kinds of permits has to now include that EJ score when they submit an application for a permit to the Department of the Environment. And the Department of the Environment is interested in building on that because of that progress. Well, what do we do with that score? And currently the Maryland Department of the Environment does not have the authority to alter or deny a permit based on an EJ score. But as a result of the election and the appointment process, we have a secretary who is interested in her agency having that authority. Elections matter, go vote. So it's, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later in in an afternoon session where the Secretary of the Environment, along with a couple other secretaries, are going to be on a panel. So a little plug to join us for that discussion. So really, really important initiatives that truly are making a difference in people's lives. So, and if you're interested in how your elected officials voted on any number of environmental bills over the last several years, the scorecard is an accountability tool that the Maryland League of Conservation Voters offers. So you can check out our scorecards and say, how did you vote on that? How did you vote on that bill? Yeah, we have 100% legislators here. But no surprise that Dr. Wilson would only invite 100%ers here to the conference. So, Delia Fraser Hidalgo, over to you. What looking forward to 2024? What legislation are you excited about?
So a couple things. One is, I think, you hit the nail on the head. When we talk about climate change and when we talk about the bills that we put in, when we talk about climate change policy, I think it is imperative. It is absolutely imperative that we consider all the externalities. And when I say externalities, that's basically what you were saying, Rebecca. Like, we have to figure out what all of this means. We have to get the data, and we have to get the tools, and we have to connect the dots. The dots are all out there. We just have to connect them. And I think that all of these pieces have to come together. With that said, a couple of bills, one that I did last year, which was an air quality monitoring bill. So basically what it did is it directed the Department of the Environment to put up air quality monitors in various places in the state. Now, the Department of Environment to some degree does this, and they partner with others that have done it. I've seen it. It's really, really cool. It's amazing. There are a lot of different sizes and qualities air monitors that detect different kinds of particulate matter at different rates and different sizes. So the new Secretary of the Environment, she came in and she's really excited about doing the same thing. And I will tell you, it was a little bit challenging for me as a legislator that had been working and functioning for the last 8 years under a governor that didn't believe in any of this. Like, he was just burn, baby, burn. Pollution doesn't matter. Climate change doesn't matter, with some rare exceptions, I have to say. But for the most part, it really wasn't, it was really always a fight. So I went into last session prepared for a fight and realized they wanted to do the same thing. So I withdrew the bill. We didn't push the bill forward because the Department of Environment loved to do the same thing. And we're working with them. We did a tour of a facility just a couple of weeks ago that was amazing. And we have to do more of those. We have to figure out how to do more air quality monitoring. We need more science to figure out where the air quality is lower. We have general ideas by highways, by bus depots, by train stations, by the ports, wherever they're burning a lot of fossil fuels, particularly a lot of diesel, and a lot of emissions, coal-fired power plants, that kind of thing. So what this bill attempted to do, and what we're continuing to work on, is if we can gather that data and show higher particulate matter, and then correlate that with increased levels of asthma, increased levels of learning issues, sick days, more people calling out sick, then I think it starts to give us the facts and the science that we need so that the Department of the Environment can deny permits. Because ultimately what we need to do is figure out the facts that are necessary to join those two things from a public health and a climate change. And we need to figure out how to connect those dots. And the science and this public air quality monitoring that I've been working on with the Department of Environment will help to connect those dots. And then those permits can hopefully be denied in the future if the science supports what I know it will support, as well as addressing the current issues and making sure that scrubbers are put on, or whatever we have to do on current situations, a lot of urban areas, making sure that from an environmental justice perspective, we address those issues. Now, we all think that those issues are there. We know that some of those issues are there, but we don't necessarily have all of the data that we need to convince some others that it's actually true. And that's the big problem. So there's that bill. I'm not sure where that's going to go this coming year. I think we might try to come in the back door with that and just kind of work on some additional funding for MGE so that they can hire some more folks and or figure out other ways to gather some of that data. But the idea, Rebecca, that you mentioned about permitting, I think that is imperative. We have got to start making serious policy when it comes to climate change and the environment, and when it comes to EJ issues. We have to put the power. We have to make sure that those permits can be denied if they're bad for the community. If they can't prove that they're good for the community, if they're bad for the community, then they need to be denied. So that's a piece. Another bill that I'll be working on just very quickly is kind of modeled. It's modeled after the tobacco settlement to some degree, and it basically says that these big fossil fuel giants that have been contributing and causing the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate change and the heating of the planet and all the storms that we see, stormwater rise, all of the things that we see, it holds them accountable and forces them to pay. So that's another bill that I'll have again this year. It's tweaked a little bit, but it could generate as much as $8 or $10 billion in reparations for the state of Maryland, which could go, and in the bill does go to EJ communities and goes to a lot of different remediation policy pieces, from the Department of the Environment to energy, to public health. But there's a lot of money out there, and just like the tobacco companies did in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they do today, they know that tobacco causes cancer and they know it kills people, and they just don't care because they want to make money. Well, the fossil fuel industry is pretty much the same. They've known that burning fossil fuels is destroying our planet and destroying the environment. They've known it since they did their own scientists came to that conclusion back in the 70s, and they've been hiding it ever since, because to them money is more important. So there's that bill as well, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So I hope you all are excited now about the 2024 session as well. What questions do you, before I have some more, but it wanted to pause. Do folks in the room have questions? Yeah. Do we have two? Go ahead. Yeah. We have several questions. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna repeat it, but if you want to talk.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so thanks so much for all of this. It's really helpful to hear what Maryland legislators are thinking. So, hi. My name is Sabrina Fu, and my office is right next door at the Global Campus. I'm a long time, 30 plus years Maryland resident, and I appreciate that you're trying to look at things holistically, and also, you mentioned like the immediate health issue like asthma stuff, which are from the co-pollutants of burning fossil fuel. And of course, I think some of the things that most people have difficulty is that the cleanest we can do is fossil fuel burning and CO2, and CO2 is the main cause for climate change. So what that leads to is really transitioning out of fossil fuel. So I know Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, you have in the past sponsored the CCEJ, the Climate Crisis and Environmental Justice Act, which tries to get to the source of fossil fuel use by putting a price on fossil fuel and increasing it, and then bringing much of the money that we get for that to environmental justice communities. So I didn't know like your thoughts on trying to get this a bipartisan, thinking things holistically instead of putting band-aids on wherever we can, which sometimes we need to do, trying to get at the source, and especially if it's regional, and of course national would be great too. But anyway, your thoughts on trying to get really tying our ecology to our economy, trying to say when those negative externalities, let's get it at the source rather than trying to patch our way around.
Yeah.
So I think you're referring to the carbon pricing bill that I had put in for years. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have down in Annapolis is that we have the politics of getting bills passed, right? It was just a question of votes. And that bill I had, I think, for 4 years, along with Senator Kramer, and we just ran into a lot of issues of getting people to understand those links, and the idea was that that bill was going to cost the ratepayer and the taxpayer in the state of Maryland money, despite the fact that that wasn't actually what the bill was supposed to do or going to do. That was the perception, and it was very, very difficult to get over that perception. So one of the things that came up was the bill that we just talked about a super fund, which in a way does the same thing, and in some ways it goes more directly to the big carbon polluters, right? It goes directly to the big fossil fuel industry, so that there's a lot less ambiguity. So it's a little bit easier when it comes to my colleagues to wrap their head around something similar to a tobacco settlement to this. Just going directly after, BP, Shell, or ExxonMobil, or specifically like Saudi Arabia, Aramco, those kinds of things. So that's the direction that seems to be. I think I'm hoping I can get a little bit more traction, because the last bill I had for 4 years, and I just could not get the traction to get the bill across the finish line.
That answer your question? Sort of. All right. Well, one thing, an opportunity right now. The Maryland Department of the Environment is in the process right now of writing their climate plan, right? So the Climate Solutions Now Act passed in 2022, big climate bill, and set targets for the state to reduce our emissions 60% by 2031. That's ambitious. That's the most ambitious short-term goal in the nation. We should be proud of that. It's important. We need to do it. How do we do it? MDE is grappling with that question right now. They're having a virtual listening session on the 26th. So you can tune in, get the download on what they're thinking about. Public comment is open until October 15th on the climate plan. So if you think the state should implement a cap and invest program.
I've already talked to them about
Yeah.
it. Very good letter to the secretary.
Great. So
Yeah, no, but I think one of the things that the delegate mentioned that sort of is alarming is that we can't get elected officials to see more holistically, right? I mean, that's sort of what I heard, right? That's why we can't tackle something like carbon.
the one thought was that there's a concern that elected officials aren't seeing things holistically, and that's why a carbon fee can't get passed. Do you think you agree?
Is that for me, Rebecca?
Yeah.
Yes, I do agree. I think that's accurate.
But I also think that's why it's up to us to help folks see things holistically. The other thing is legislators just have to vote on how many bills every session?
Thousands.
Yeah, it's and every committee gets really well versed on their subject matter, and then has to get really well versed really quickly when it hits the floor, right? And so the folks on the various committees might be really well versed and they sat through the hearings, they get why the carbon fee is so important, or they'll understand why, if it gets out of committee, it's because it has the support of the committee or the majority of folks in there. When it hits the floor, you all of a sudden have dozens more people who are weighing in on this legislation who didn't sit through the hearings, who didn't hear that personal testimony, who didn't. So, but who have been dealing with, some of the other issues in the other committees, when you're talking about gun violence, when you're talking about legalizing marijuana, you're talking about, there's really important societal wide issues that the other committees take on. And so it's up to us as advocates too, to make sure that everyone, because like you said, legislator, you don't get to back off when the vote comes up. You're still making a choice. So that's when you as constituents really make a difference in that moment. So like paying attention when your bill hits the floor, knowing that that's going to be really important. So there's some process stuff we should know and when to weigh in. Yeah, we have another question. Yeah, please, if you don't mind. If you could introduce yourself. Yeah, we have about 15 more minutes. So
Oh, okay.
We have time for both questions.
Chad Martin, NC Black Alliance. You had talked about Delegate Hidalgo. You had talked about not being able to get veto power with DEQ because you didn't have the, I guess, the research or the science. And I'm wondering if you guys use the EJ screening tool or the cumulative impact or the social vulnerability index, because a lot of those pretty much give you, talks about fence line communities, talks about, these are environmental justice communities, and it actually breaks down like heart disease, asthma, and the higher rates in these certain areas, especially BIPOC communities. So I'm just wondering, did you use these tools? I used to work with DEQ in Virginia, and even though we use those tools, we wasn't able to use those tools for veto power when people put permits in. But it sounds like you guys have somebody who's actually on board. So I'm wondering, so my question, sorry, went the long way. So my question is, why wouldn't you go for a bill right now when you have a secretary who is more in favor for you? Because if you get it in now, what happens when that person leaves and you get somebody else that's not in there that is not on board? So why wouldn't you try to get that in now when you have somebody that actually is on board? And maybe that's just because your colleagues are fighting against it, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's a complicated question. It's a great question, I would say. So last year was the first year with the new governor, with Governor Moore. And so I think a lot of the delegates and senators that had been around had been used to doing nothing but fighting and fighting and fighting. So with with Governor Moore, all of a sudden we found that administration that wanted to work with us. And remember, those secretaries and those folks were being sworn in after session already started. Like the bills that I talked about and the bills that we're talking about now are bills that are already well down the road. I mean, we've been working on them for, in some cases, years, in some cases, months. We're 3 months away from the beginning of session, 4 months away from the beginning of session, and so a lot of these bills are already being baked right now. So now that the secretaries have been in for going on 9 months or 8 months, they're getting their feet wet as far as the job is concerned. They're learning how to work with their staff. They're learning how to deal with legacy staff that might not be quite as receptive or have been doing things a certain way for 8 years, and they need to relearn or be retaught that we're dealing with a completely different way of thinking with the new governor, which I can't tell you how absolutely amazing and refreshing that has been. So there's been a lot of transition and a lot of people just kind of getting up to speed. So there's that piece. The other piece about it too is I'm pretty familiar with Dr. Wilson's, Kobe Wilson's EJ tool. I've had a lot of conversations with him. He has testified on a lot of my bills with me and others. He's very proactive on the bills and making sure that we talk about that. That I would say that one of the problems is that a lot of the delegates and senators aren't familiar. I think what Rebecca said earlier, we hear over 3,000 bills and we pass somewhere around 400. Every single one of those needs to have a hearing, right? Every one of those bills gets a hearing. Most of them get voted down or they're withdrawn or whatever happens to them. They don't make it to the floor. But with that said, in the House, we're broken up into 6 committees. That's 6 basically subject matter expertise. But within that committee, like for example, the committee that I'm on is Economic Matters. So it deals with the legalization of marijuana that we did in the state. It dealt with the regulation part of it. Now, the legalization was done in the Judiciary Committee, and but the regulation part was done in Economic Matters, my committee. So we deal with a lot of the economics of the state, and we deal with like insurance, like the different kinds of insurance in the state, particularly property and casualty insurance. And we also deal with the utilities. So we're dealing with PEPCO, BG&E, the Public Service Commission, PJM. We're dealing with all that as well. So the breadth of subject matter just in my committee is pretty broad. I mean, to go from property and casualty insurance and business regulation to utilities and climate change is pretty big. If you look at environment and transportation, they're dealing with transportation issues and environmental issues, but they also deal with some issues when it comes just to the House and the Senate, like procedural issues. So you put those things together and you have committees in which people don't always dig in and know a lot about specific subject matter. I don't know a lot about the subject matter, for example, in HGO, which is Health and Government Operations. That's healthcare and all the government stuff. I know very little about that. So I think that in my committee in particular, and in ENT, Environment and Transportation, you just have a lot of people that are even within those committees they struggle with the subject matter because it is so vast. And it is a citizen legislature, so we're only in session for 90 days. And I can't tell you, and Rebecca, I'm sure, and Senator Ellis will say the same thing. How many bills people just said, I just don't understand it, so I'm not going to vote on it. Let's just hold the bill because I don't understand it. They either miss the bill hearing or they don't get the subject matter, and so they're not comfortable voting on it. And a lot of times, whether it's the EJ screening tool or others, people don't understand it, and it's hard for them to kind of grasp that in a 90-day session. So sometimes it takes years to get a committee up to speed. And I will tell you that in some of these committees, there are a lot of new members, and every time there's an election, every 4 years, a new set of delegates and senators come in, and they get assigned to committees. And sometimes they get assigned to committees and they know nothing about the subject matter in that committee, and they have to be brought up to speed. And that can take 2 or 3 sessions to get them brought up to speed. I hope that helps answer. I mean, I think we are making progress, and I am optimistic. It just takes a little while to get there, and I know that we don't have that. So we don't have that time. So I push as hard as I can to try and push the ball as fast as I can, but there are just a lot of limitations.
Yeah, and the delegate is 100% right. And I've seen a mistake that advocates generally make is they might go to their favorite legislator in the House or their favorite legislator in the Senate, and you introduce a bill, and the Senate or the House hears this, and then it comes over to the other body, and you have to really start over again, right? A bill passes the Senate, it goes over to the House, it starts from scratch over there, and vice versa. So to get something really done, you need advocates on both sides, and to work that issue early. The bills I care about the most, I pre-file them. What does that mean, pre-file? November 1st is a deadline generally to get bills in, where the lawyers work on it and draft it back and forth with the legislator and the advocates between, say, November and mid-December, and to get it just right. So the very first day of session, that bill is introduced. And that bill is heard generally the very first week when committees start to have hearings. And even when I do that with my major initiatives, it will take almost 89 to 90 days to pass. And a lot of people don't understand that. I've seen great bills comes over from the House, which we had no clue in the Senate committee about. And we're rushing through, right? And we don't have time to have that deep dive in that issue to get our brains around that very important issue. This year, it was an issue that came from the House with organic composting as far as dealing with death care. We have, I see eyes open. Yep, exactly. It's like you have traditional burial, you have cremation, and there's something now percolating called organic composting where, no, I'm talking about individuals passing away and human body. Well, no, you put it in the, you use organic matter to decompose that body over time. And it came through the House, it passed the House, it came into the Senate, and people were like, what's this? And I mean, I defended that bill on the Senate floor. We eventually let it through to study the issue. It took up so much time on the Senate floor. It took up 4 hours on the Senate floor close to the end of the session, the Senate president said, we just can't get through this. So it wasn't heard. But that bill, which is a very important study, because we want to stay up to date with new trends, we don't want to just it's always do it that way and we'll never really change. But we didn't have the time to have a deep dive in the Senate on that issue. And so the entire legislation died, and we'll think it'll come back next year. But the issue there was we did not have the time. So all these issues, if you have an issue, if you have something that's important to you, work hard to find a sponsor on both sides to make sure that and get that bill in early and make sure it work really hard, because all of us hate to vote on something we don't understand. Okay. And I can say I'm not in Annapolis. Most of my colleagues refuse to rubber stamp an issue. And so if we don't understand it, chances are it will die.
Great points. Quick clarifications. I think the air quality monitoring bill is a great example of something that legislators needed to legislate when there's an unfriendly administration. But when there's a friendly administration, tactics change, and you can say, oh, instead of asking you to do something through legislation because otherwise you won't do it, unfriendly administration, I'm just going to help you get money to do it because I know you're committed to this issue. So it's like a tactic change, but the issue is still hard. We do expect a cumulative impacts bill to come forward this session. The hope is it is an administration bill. I don't want to jinx it. But because we have a committed secretary, which changes the game entirely from an advocacy perspective, and the mapping tools are critical. And in the state of Maryland, through the Climate Solutions Now Act, we defined in statute definitions of overburdened communities and underserved communities. And Dr. Wilson's team and the state of Maryland are working on mapping tools so we know exactly what communities we're talking about, so we can allocate, we can apply a Justice 40 lens on every policy, every program, so that funding can get allocated to communities that are overburdened and underserved. And a lack of definition can no longer be used as an excuse for inaction on the issue. And that was why those definitions got codified in Climate Solutions Now. And we're working to create county by county maps to go out, because the state doesn't have infinite resources. So Maryland LCV is working on a set of maps that we can then reach out to counties individually and let them know, here's those maps, here's these definitions, apply for federal funding and allocate it to communities who need it the most and where it can make the biggest impact. Just a couple of quick follow-ups on that. I think we have two quick questions and then we'll wrap up. So quick questions.
Hi, my name is Sarania Tharmaraj. I'm a third-year PhD student at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. My areas of work are in health communication, policy advocacy, and entertainment education, so using theater and film. And right now I'm working in climate communication, and I'm hearing a lot about the importance of communication to constituents as well as to other policymakers. And in terms of these behaviors we're talking about, these advocacy behaviors, so like going out and voting, signing petitions, talking to legislators, what do you think is the best way to communicate that to people to do these behaviors? And I'm thinking more specifically about this link between climate and public health. Like, how important do you think that is to bring out? Because also climate can be very polarizing. And I mean, public health can be too, but I'd like to think that, especially at the local level, what do you think is the best way to communicate that to, just people trying to advocate for these policies?
So I would start by saying one of the things that we worked on when we banned fracking in Maryland is that we looked in Pennsylvania and in some of these communities, and we saw 2 to 3 times increases in emergency room visits for kids, for adults, for pregnant women with bronchial related and other issues, but they increased 2 to 3 times from before they started fracking to during fracking. And so the question is that attributable to air quality issues? Is it attributable to well and water contamination? There's a lot of different things, but I think, when you talk to your friends and family in a particular community, I think that the idea of asthma and other related issues kind of, I don't know that is quite the third rail as climate change is. It seems like climate change is just a big third rail today, which I don't understand why it is. It's just science, but it is. So dealing with that means that maybe you can bond with people and agree on things like asthma, or learning disabilities, or lead, those kinds of things. I don't know if that helps, but I think that maybe not using the word climate change, but using the word health, or public health, or emergency rooms, just kind of bringing it down to earth for some of those folks. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, and I can offer my two cents on that issue. Communication is very important, always to each other, to like your legislators. So also focus. Okay? There are a lot of issues that we have in this space when it comes to environmental justice. I mean, I could talk about 4 hours other stuff that I'm working on, right? But the key is to figure out what's most important to you, this place and this time. What's most important to you, your community, and pick that one issue to approach your senators, delegates, on a national level, your Congress person or your U.S. senator, and say, this issue is important to me and my community. And what is being done to address this issue? As legislators, my power lies in legislation, right? Put a bill in and work to get it passed. And so, all your legislators, whether national or state or even the county level, focus on what legislation they're putting in. And if your representative is not putting in legislation that impacts your community, ask them to draft a bill to address that issue. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Focus, focus, focus. Also, bring other folks into that conversation with your legislator. Because when we have bill hearings, okay, we're looking around, see who shows up. If it's just one or two people, no matter what the issue, how lofty it is, we tend to move on. I put a bill in to give ID cards to return citizens coming out of incarceration 3 years ago. Put that bill in, it passed the very first year. I had 56 individuals come from Charles County to Annapolis. We flooded that hearing room, right? The eyes of everyone lit up. All these folks are here. This is an important issue. And the commitment from the chair at that time, we're going to do it this year. And we formed a work group during the legislative session and addressed all the issues, complications around it, and it passed. So, issue that's important to you, issue that's important to the community, get folks to focus on a legislator to put a bill in to address that issue and communicate to your relatives, your friends about the importance of that issue and work with that individual who will introduce bill. So in Annapolis, I can introduce any bill on any topic at any time. Okay. Just because I'm the finance committee, I don't have to do the stuff economic development, transportation. I can put a criminal justice reform bill in, a budget bill in, any bill, any issue. And I've done that in my 5 years in Annapolis. My bills have passed every committee and every topic area because I just don't represent folks who care about LGBTQ issues or folks who just care about light rail from Charles County to DC. I mean, I represent everyone, maternal health, the disparities there, past bills. I mean, if it's important to you, if the issue is important to you, communicate that to your legislator. And it's their responsibility to be responsive to you. And if they are not, then you communicate to them that you will hold them responsible when you have that voice where you are the boss, i.e., elections.
There we go. How many of you have experienced a hotter summer this summer? Have you noticed more rain? More erratic rain, right? So it's like it's really dry and then really. Did you know Maryland had its first locally acquired malaria case recently? Yep, had NAS, so vector-borne disease. when it's a really hot day, do you have someone in your family that you're particularly worried about because of that heat and you think they're a little bit more vulnerable? Maybe a kid, maybe an older adult, maybe your neighbor, those who are unhoused. That's how you get people. That's how we talk about climate change and health. Not the carbon dioxide and we can do that. We can do that. If you want a technical presentation, I'm here with you. I'm here with you. If your audience, if you want to do storytelling, if you want to do, ask questions. Help people see themselves as part of the solution. Help people see their neighbors as vulnerable to the impacts, and that being a part of the solution makes a difference. And it's not that we don't have the solutions. We need the political will, and we need folks talking about it, and we need the science is there. So we can study more. We can, we invest in institutions. Yeah. And bring it out, bring out the science, like help people see themselves as being impacted and being part of the solution without having to quit their job and become a full-time climate activist, but that the solutions are the impacts are here and the solutions are next door, like they're here too. And that's where the storytelling comes in. I have had more sinus infections because of allergies in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 30. That's because it's ragweed loves carbon dioxide, and ragweed is all over the place in this region now. That's my story, right? There was lead in the pipes in my high school. That's why I'm in this movement. That's my story. And if we all have that story and we're all coming together, that's the communications win. We're out of time. I feel like we could all be here for a while. So lunch is in the grand ballroom. Go enjoy with your colleagues, and then have some caffeine because there's more sessions this afternoon. Please give a large round of applause for our speakers. Thank you so much for the work that you do in Annapolis. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for being our champions. And we need you, and thank you. And we'll see you all in sessions this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. We took a group of kids to go see the congressman. He was like, "Yeah, I understand it's 70% free reduced lunch." One of the kids said, "Sir, I'm one of the 70%." Congressman, shut up.